Is this the start of a deeper sell-off in the markets or just another healthy pullback? Today, we're going to be breaking it all down. My name is Paul Sampson. Welcome back to DataDash. Markets have been under pressure these last few days. And in this video, we're going to take a look at the key levels to watch, the key factors that will determine whether sellers stay in control here or if buyers are about to step back in. Folks, I've got a jam-packed episode here for you today. Be sure to grab yourself a cup of coffee, whether it's hot or iced, because I'm breaking it all down right now. Before we begin, folks, our friends over at BloFin are running a massive $10,000 deposit and trade rewards event that, depending on your deposit and trading volume, you can actually earn futures bonuses from $30 all the way up to $10,000. There's no long process, just deposit, trade, and claim your rewards. Now, we'll note to make sure that you read and review the terms and conditions to fully understand exactly how the bonuses work here. But in my opinion, this is a great opportunity to get extra rewards while trading. Check it out if you're interested. If you have not already, join today with the link down in our description below. All right, folks, Bitcoin did something last week that's not necessarily ideal, right? So we're going to kind of cover this. This is on the weekly time frame here. We just closed out our latest weekly candle right here. And as you can see, we basically came up and swept the last high, our all-time high that we set in just a few weeks back at about 123,000, breaching up to about 125,000, only to come back about $10,000 less at the time of recording to about 115. So what does this mean? What's the outlook here? What are we looking for in terms of continuation? Is this where we could see a sizable sell-off and correction, or is this just yet again another little liquidity sweep up in this region, a slight pullback to this region down below? And what will we be looking for to invalidate any more downside, right? So that's what I'm going to be covering today, as well as just taking a look at more of the macro outlooks here, total market, total two, some of the traditional markets as well. So before we jump into the charts here and kind of dissect what's going on, let's take a look at some of the outside indications that you generally can lead us into a little bit more of our higher time frame analysis, such things as the fear and greed index, some of our ETF products, inflows and outflows, our strategy tracker, right? So for Michael Saylor's strategy, we're looking at the acquisitions of the Bitcoin products that they've been picking up over the last couple of quarters here, which is still continuing to perform very well to the upside. And when we look at the fear and greed index over the market, it's relatively neutral again, right? So it's not necessarily overly pushing or pulling in either direction. It is leaning into greed. The only reason I say it's more neutral is, I know that technically the neutral spot is around that 50 spot. To me, realistically, the neutral point is pretty much at where we're at now. I'd say almost like the middle of this area here. Let's just call it 65 to 70. Let's just call it 65, right? Like middle point to this region and into the middle point of this region, I would say is relatively neutral. It definitely leans towards the other opposite end there. But over time, it's really just an area where there's a little bit of greed or a little bit of fear that kind of comes into the sentiment here, but truly nothing too high and too extreme, I guess. So like we're not in any extremes is the long story short there. And that's for both the stock market and in crypto. So crypto is obviously leaning more into the higher neutral area than the stock market. So really here, there's no extremes here as far as fear or greed would go. So I point that out because at the times when we are in extremes, which we've seen many, many times here, especially when you get to some of these really high news events, that is where we put in significant highs or lows, right? So I point this out because when we do look at the chart here and try to identify and understand whether or not we just put in a significant high, it's important to kind of note where we are as far as the sentiment would go, as well as with the technicals, of course. So technically speaking, like I just pointed out, not the best look to kind of come up and take that high on a weekly time frame, but we're going to look into that. But aside from that, there was no huge euphoric events around there. So not that that's the end all be all, but it's just something to bear in mind while we're building our analysis here. And we've also got the ETF products that have been very, very insightful over the last few years here, or at least since 2024 when they truly began with Bitcoin. And I just want to, we've been highlighting the higher time frame outlooks here, where over time, since they've basically launched in January of 2024, price action and the ETFs have trended higher, even though we've seen short-term pullbacks along the way. And that's always something I want to highlight. There's always going to be a red day. There's always going to be corrections. But overall, in the higher time frame, in the bigger picture, things are still continuing to trend to the upside. So let's take a look at those as well. So a big shout out as always to HODL 15 Capital over on X. They do a very fine job of keeping these updated pretty much each and every week. And this week was no different. Okay. So I always highlight that these are quarterly updates here until we get to the current quarter, which is obviously in motion, right? So it's adaptive at the moment. Dynamic, I guess you could say, because we're still building it out. So between the last update and today has only been a few weeks because we're still building out the current quarter. But over time, we can see quarter over quarter, and up until this last 2 weeks, it's an increasing trend here that has gone into effect, with total US ETFs increasing along the way. Recently, still, even though we've had these slight pullbacks, you're still seeing an increase here as the institutional interest still continues even at these levels here, right? So something of note, really nothing totally drastic. I like to try to keep an eye on it over the quarter over quarter here, but just want to kind of take a peek at it as we do have a new week of data here on a week where it was a little bit of a pullback towards the end of it, and still ended up with a green ETF product lineup here. So this is the strategy tracker available at strategytracker.com. This is free. There is paid versions of it, but very interesting outlook here. Nick covers this quite a bit as well. And you can see that this is, again, a quarter over quarter basis. And essentially since 2020, we've seen the Bitcoin acquisition just completely increase over time here. And the one that the area, the region I just really want to point out, and granted, once again, they're coming in, they're dollar cost averaging over time. They're buying when it's 3,000, when it's 50,000, when it's 20,000, 30,000, 100,000. But the thing I just wanted to point out is that of all these areas and all these times where Bitcoin was trading at new all-time highs at times during these periods, obviously they had some really good buy zones as well. The time when they're really hitting the gas, I mean, truly just doubling their investment, is ever since Q4 of 2024, which is basically just the beginning of this year, the end of last year, and when Bitcoin went to $100,000. So they're picking up the majority of, or not the majority, but they're picking up a huge amount of Bitcoin over $100,000. So even with the price action at where it is today, their strategy still sees the benefit or the outlook here that Bitcoin is at least going to be worth more than their purchasing price here that they're coming in at now, so by no means does this just indicate a straight up only type of market, because strategy is buying up so much Bitcoin and there's only so much available in the market and all these things. But I think it's just an interesting outlook to kind of view from someone who's obviously investing and managing some really high capital, to realize that they're really still willing to be putting on risk here over $100,000 Bitcoin. And this is our current quarter, so this is just since July, the last 6 weeks, and we're already engulfing last quarter, right? So just something of note here, that strategy still picking up a ton of Bitcoin as we're continuing into these unknown territories, essentially. All right, so let's take a look at Bitcoin. Generally, I go for the more macro outlook here, and I think it's pretty well known to many at this point. And if not, my higher time frame target window has remained that Bitcoin would see about $130,000 to $140,000 around September time, right? So we are now in August. We've seen 125,000 just about. So the question at the moment is that a substantial high? Was that the high? And all these things, right? Every time we get a pullback in the market, everybody gets very worked up. So let's just put a little bit of neutrality around this and just take this with a level-headed approach here. So in last week's video, we were trading around this region when we started the week, and then we got a nice push to the upside. I had noted that there was likeliness to come back down to about $117,000, $116,000 area. Okay, the reason for that was we just had some really local areas there. They're weekly targets, basically, that were likely to be met. All right. And then I did point out the other thing that we wanted to be aware of is that, and really didn't want to see, not that it's a complete death sentence, but it, definitely locally is something that is not a great look. And it was exactly what we ended up doing, right? You didn't want to see us come up take the high, close back below it, because that would trigger a sell-off, okay? I'm going to keep this relatively simple for a little bit of a bigger picture. Obviously, there's a lot of smaller levels in between and all that good stuff. But let's just look at this on a week-by-week basis right now. And realistically, the monthly open for this month. So currently we're in August. So the month open is sitting right here about where we're trading at right now, about 115,700. And we have come back down to that area and are currently below it. So for any more upside at the moment, right? If we just want to see and note that maybe we just came down, put in yet again another higher low, which is still keeping our current uptrend intact, we want to get back above our monthly open. All right. So whether or not that means we still dip a little bit below down to this untapped weekly level, flirt around this region or not, either way, we want to get back above 115,717 for any more upside at the moment. And then from there, we're looking up towards, we have some new weekly targets at about 119, 118,000. And we'll look to flip those areas next and then challenge back into the all-time highs. That's our road back to the upside at the moment, okay, is that we want to flip 115,717 and then ideally that 118,500. At that point, I would expect us to challenge back into these highs again and then continue on from there. Now, the alternative, just while we're trading in this region, personally, I don't foresee it to be the most likely, but I just want to, we gotta be aware of it, right? So when we started off this quarter, when we started off this 6 months, we did leave a untapped high time frame average down below, which is very likely, right? So this is not a guarantee by any means, but it is very likely that we do come back to it in the second half of this year. All right. And that's 97,800. So the more time that we spend below our monthly open is kind of a little warning sign of more downside to come. All right. Starting to close back below our recent low of about 111, which obviously takes us back to our previous high back here. Meaning, if we come back and start closing down in this region, you have to be aware that a sizable correction down at that point is likelier, right? So that is the little couple lines in the sand right now. I would say that the month open is the big one for now. I want to flip that for upside. While we're below it, we just need to have a little bit more caution on our mind here. Coming back down below our last low and our previous high at the time is definitely not a great look, especially after the way we just reacted up in this region. And at that point, I would say that it's likely that we come back down. And obviously, we'll have new context around those timeframes where we could look to come, and that is how I would kind of approach things at the moment, pretty cautiously. Okay. Now, if you ask me personally what I would lean to, I would say that I think it's likelier we at least get another push back up into these 120 areas again. And then if anything, we do actually challenge into a new high, still continue upwards towards that 130, 140. Right, which was the overall AB equals CD target around this 130, 140. The only thing about this is I just don't want to overly marry, these levels and times while we're so close to them now, right? This is a very helpful tool or very helpful insight to have when we're trading at these lower levels and, having the ability to kind of foresee a bit, I guess, or just have the idea that we, would see more upside towards these areas to be able to put on risk on some of the bigger pullback days, right? So while we're trading so close to these areas now, and while we've already attacked, 125, which is only about a 6% gap, it's not necessarily a place where I'm looking to get overly bullish at the moment, right? So, but I still do lean towards seeing this move to the upside here. So I want to take a look at the total market with Bitcoin. And while I don't have the recent all-time high marked off here, which we did, same as Bitcoin, basically kind of sweep it and close back below, which again, not the best sign at the moment. And not that I'm looking to ignore that, because it definitely, like I said, I'm pointing it out right now. It already has occurred. But the bigger level for me is really this right here, which was the all-time high that we set in place at the end of last year. So the 3.73 trillion essentially. So as long as the market is holding above this region, I still see this as a relatively bullish outlook here. Very, very nice uptrend intact. It's only when we start closing back below that again that we would, again, like try to issue a little bit more caution at the time. Really have to see how things are going to unfold. But while we're trading above this region, I still think it is very likely that we head higher here over time. Now, this is a daily chart here, so this is not something I expect overnight. Another thing that I continue to hammer in is if we're going to see any sizable moves to the upside, nothing's going to happen overnight. Yes, we'll have some bursts here and there, like 20%, 30% here. Some altcoins may pop really nicely, but as a whole, like you're not going to have the whole market just 4x or 2x or anything overnight. There's always going to be those corrections, always going to be the cool downs, and just viewing this, that just want to kind of point that out as simple as possible. We've had the anchored VWAP here from the overall low. That has helped us, to identify some really key regions along the way, right? When it's paired up with the extremes of, news at the time, two of which most recent, right, were the carry trade last year, the tariff wars this year. And since then, we've just had a nice little uptrend. So nothing to really get too concerned about until we start closing back below there, in my opinion. So that's about 3.73 trillion. We're trading just a little bit above it at the moment. It's not too far above. But at the time of recording, let's just kind of keep it relatively neutral here in that sense. And total two, which is the overall altcoin market, still looks pretty good. I've highlighted this before, right, where I've been looking at this potential cup and handle for a long time here, right, and looking at this in the traditional format where you get this nice rounded structure, then you get this falling channel to form your handle essentially, right into a key support, that gold pocket, and then you get the break. And while many will be looking for the break of the neckline for confirmation, right, so ideally you'd look at this region here, you'd look for the cup like this, which now we've basically just put in. And the next thing is you'd look for the break of the all-time high, and that's when you get that confirmation and continuation to the upside, measured move, and all that good stuff. For me personally, I like to get involved a lot sooner than up here because obviously this is where we just saw Ethereum run 240%. As well as many others have a nice little rally to the upside and things of that nature. Overall, this was another big key region I was looking to aside from this one. So when we came down to this would have been a big zone of support to put on some risk, and you get that next rally up. Obviously, there's new entry opportunities. The best ones were obviously lower, but we may not come back to them. So what do? You look for this level right here to get flipped into support. So that would have been your last one here. And then from here, we were looking for that break in continuation now to the upside from this level. So overall, as long as we're holding above 1.33 trillion, still bullish on the overall altcoin market, including ETH. And again, daily time frame. This is something that I don't anticipate getting to this next target anytime soon, as far as like days or weeks. I think these are monthly outlooks here at this point. So probably the remainder of this year, maybe even some into next year. But so far, nothing broken here either. Just traditional push, to the upside, little cool down, and we'll see how things kind of progress. I did want to highlight Chainlink, as it's been making some headlines over the weekend. At least it had a really nice push. I believe it was literally just over the weekend. This was Friday into yesterday, Sunday, about 25% push to the upside, a little cool down now. So we were highlighting this recently, right, where we were looking for this range break. So nothing really materializes until we flipped out of this $21 area. And then from there, I'm looking for 37.99 and then basically back to the all-time high. I put in this little pit stop along the way because there is the 886 that comes in right here at 2850 that could set up a bearish harmonic just locally. And that's a sequence of Fibonacci's, right? So this is known as the bat. So this would be a little bearish bat locally. And if we got a nice rejection up at that 2850, assuming that that's not our local top already. And the only thing this would do is it just sets up a little pullback, cool down, right? So if we saw that, you would be likely to get a push down to our bat target, and that is the 382, and then ultimately the gold pocket and the B point, which pretty much line up down here at like 17 again. If this was to unfold, I'd have my eyes pretty much set right here more than anything, because it's not only the 382, which is our overall area that when you get a really strong trend, you don't always get the gold pocket, right? Most time we get a shallow retracement to this region and see continuation. It's also the high side of our range right here. So there's a double up of support right there. And this is just a little, this is not confirmed by any point or by any means right this second. And this is just a little foresight of something I'd be looking for. just assuming we get a little pit stop right here, hit our head there, pull back a little bit again before we head up to our next two major targets, which is 37.99 and 54.11. So unlike Bitcoin having these major swings of its high and having a little pullback, the S&P 500 has not, right? So we're still pretty much holding steady here. Relatively decent sign in my opinion for the overall market. Now I will highlight again, this is an area where it's a little bit of a risk, of course, because we've already put in a substantial low. We've rallied up into new all-time highs. There are some key levels down below us that we may come back into. No guarantee, of course. So where we're trading at right now, it's a world where you really want to already had been invested. All right, this is not a time that's ideal for deploying new capital by any means. But for anyone that's already has a position or anything like that, this is kind of where I'm covering at the moment. Is that if we're looking for pullbacks, of course, that's just always something we're going to be looking for any kind of new purchases. But otherwise, the long-term targets here still remain up into this region, as long as we're trading above the 2024 high. And then speaking of strategy, I wanted to talk about MicroStrategy. That is, I wanted to look at MicroStrategy here, and one thing that I pointed out a couple months, weeks back, whatever it was, is that we had a potential for a bat here, right? So again, a sequence of Fibonacci that has a target area just below the all-time high or the high here, around that 887, and it comes in around $500. Okay, and we still have potential for this. Now, this is not something you can really work off of as far as a trade or look to see where the target areas of this would come down to until we get to the completion zone. That is something that I'm still looking towards or really aware about up here, about $500. But one thing I always look to also, again, is that our high time frame averages. So the average of last quarter, the average of the first 6 months of this year sit right here. And it's very likely that we come into that during the next 6 months, right? So the very interesting piece about this is that these are both untapped. It's very likely we come into it. Now it's not, a surprise at this point, but look at where it comes in. It's all right below all these lows. So you got May, ever since May, right? So coming down and sort of sweeping this region would be a very bullish sign. And then the key word there is sweep, which means we would come down below these lows and then you would see us closing candles back above. All right. So that's basically what you stop out everybody that's long, right? So anybody that's gotten long in this region, they get stopped out in this area or get very concerned, even if they just buy and hold and they're seeing price break down below, these recent areas, they'll start to panic sell essentially and all those things. Anyone that's gotten long in these regions here will move their stop losses up. So that kind of stops out them, even though they may be in profit. And then it just kind of sets us up for, it basically fuels a run along a lot of the times where you come in, you get the stops and you run, and it's a liquidity sweep. So that's something I'm kind of got my eyes on here as well, is that if we do sweep that 355 and then close back above, could give us the last little bit of gas to push us back up to that 500. Which puts in this pretty big harmonic setup, which is bearish, just at least short term. And realistically, it could be all the way just back to this B point. So where we'd see something along these lines, build out a range here over time. Something I'm looking at there. But I point this out too because this is where MicroStrategy, or AKA strategy now, and Bitcoin at times are known to kind of move in tandem. So if we're going to potentially put in this little sweep here and get a little rise out of strategy, it could also indicate a rise out of Bitcoin too. So as the market continues to test these levels, the next few days will be critical in determining whether sellers keep the upper hand or buyers are ready to step back in. So I'll be keeping a close eye and sharing more updates with the community, of course. And before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to our channel partner, BloFin, who is running a great deposit bonus right now. Definitely worth checking it out. Make sure to read the terms and conditions, of course. And if you'd like to take your trading to the next level and get daily updates and insights, head over to DataDashPro.com where you can join our Traders Club. We'd love to have you in there. Thank you all so much, as always, for tuning in. I'll see you all in the next video. And until then, everybody, cheers.